Yeah.
Okay,
I think it's one.
we're now recording, so I'm gonna start the meeting, since we do have a quorum. Everybody, welcome. This is the February 2024 CB2 Executive Committee meeting. I'm Susan Kent, Chair of CB2, and so we're gonna start the meeting. The first item on the agenda, which I hope everyone has, is approval of the January 24 executive meeting minutes. Does anybody have any questions about those or anything that they need to address in regards to the minutes? If not, I will take a motion to approve the minutes. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Second, chair's report, just a few things. First of all, this month at Borough Board, the one thing that happened, we had a public hearing, which no one appeared at, but to address the preliminary 2025 preliminary budget. Basically, it was put together based on feedback from all of the community boards. What we had put together ourselves back in October. A lot of the issues were the same: housing, healthcare access, education, public safety, climate resiliency. We will be responding to the borough president version at some point. We are in an election cycle. I'm happy to tell everybody that we do have a candidate for every office. We will be running a test of our election, of the voting process this Thursday, because we are in a different format than we were last month. Let's see. Everyone, I'm sure, has got, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago now, there was an email about an award for older New Yorkers, that these were recommendations that were that the community board was asked for. So if there's anybody in the community that you would like to recommend as someone who has done significant work, the deadline is the 22nd, and the details, I'm sure, is in your email. We can send it out again.
What's the definition of older?
Older, much younger. I think they are 60 and up. I didn't see that. But that is. So, broad one. Yeah, well, anyway, so I don't think we've received any suggestions, and if this is not simply people on the community board, but anybody in the community, they would eventually, there is a ceremony up in Albany for this. But just reminding you, we have a resolution that I will discuss later about video conferencing and the quorum requirements. I just pointed out because Brian Pape submitted an alternate resolution. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, I encourage you to do so that we can have.
That's the one with the edits, the highlighted changes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I just wanted to let everyone know, on the 30th of January, the new school reached out to me seeking support for a grant application to renovate the auditorium in their building on West 12th Street. Unfortunately, because of the very short turnaround time, they needed it by the 15th. This was a letter that reflected only the approval of the landmarks committee. We did not have time, but I wanted to make people aware of it. And I wanted to get feedback from people if they feel it would be appropriate to have a resolution from the board supporting the application, even though it has gone in already, just so we're on the record as supporting this.
But I'm sorry, just the Lang building on 12th Street between 6th and 5th and 6th.
You know, with the famous, we've met there in the past.
Okay.
This was simply an application for funding to do the restoration work in there.
I would like to support that.
Yeah, well, I just wanted, to put that out there in the interest of transparency. It's a tough situation. They tell me how valuable our support is, but they gave us less than 3 weeks in which to do that. But I thought it would be helpful to be on the record. And I think that's it. So,
And can, for our community support letter, can it say it's a great place for community board meeting?
the letter has already gone out.
Oh, they've already sent the letter. Yeah.
The letter literally had to go out. And
Okay.
it's
This is for the basement space?
This is that auditorium, that wonderful Art Deco auditorium.
It's on the main level.
It's on the main level, yeah.
Yeah.
We sometimes do these, I am wary of sending out a letter without having to go through the full board, but sometimes we're put into a position where you either comment or you say nothing. But considering how uniform our viewpoint is on supporting landmarks, and that is a theme that runs through everything that we do, to forego the opportunity is to say, oh, yes, we support landmarks, but here's somebody seeking funding to renovate a landmark, and we're not going to say anything. So, yes, Frederica,
This is for the new school, correct?
the new school letter.
The new school is a private institution? Yes,
Yes,
it is.
Yes, it is.
And I don't understand why we would get involved at all.
We would get involved because this is a rare interior landmark for a space that would then become open, which could be shared with the community in sponsoring public events.
Has it yet been shared?
I'm sorry?
Have we had
Has it
meetings?
lately been shared?
It's not in a condition to be shared. That's the whole point. One of the goals of the renovation is that then they can start programming things that will invite the public in.
Okay, well, relevant to Brian's suggested resolution, if that's a possibility for us to have our meetings, then I guess we should support it, but it seems out of our purview to me. But I defer.
Okay.
Just, this is the new school, it's not their new building?
No, it's the old building. It's the Lang.
It's on, yeah.
Street or is it-
It's on 12th Street.
It's outside of 12th Street.
Oh, got it, now I know which one it
Put
is.
TV volume down just a little bit. It's really loud.
Oh, thank you. Anyway, that is it for me. So I will turn it over to Mark for a little bit more. Okay.
I'll lower the volume of this here. So thanks, it calls to the district manager to receive self-nominations for officers, and indeed we do have one for every office. We have a repeat, except that the candidate for secretary is relatively new board member Emma Smith. Other than that, the ballot as of now will look a lot like last year's ballot. Self-nominations are closed as of last Thursday, but they will be reopened from the floor at the meeting, and then we'll proceed from there. This will be our first truly hybrid voting situation where some people will be in the room and some people will be online. And so what we're discussing is that we will have a procedure where we will use the same Google form we did last year, which will generate its own spreadsheet responses. And then the tally committee, I'll get to that in a second, will populate the spreadsheet with the paper ballots that are distributed and signed at in the room itself. I'm going to say this several times tonight. Will be the first. You must sign your ballot according to the bylaws, so please do sign your ballot. Even if it's an uncontested election, it's good to have good procedure. Let's see. The tally committee is prescribed in the bylaws. It is the borough president's representative, so Andrew Chang does not have an option. Another elected official representative, and I'm going to hit up somebody who has got a sense of humor. And then we need a committee chair to be the third member of the tally committee. Carter was the volunteer last year, so thank you, Carter. And so I think and so I will be grateful for an expression of interest either around this table right now or at some time between now and next Thursday. That's, I think, all we have to do with respect to the election tonight. The March full board venue will change. It was going to be PS 41, but they have started a renovation project. And as you may know, in public schools, when you're renovating, they start the work at 3 o'clock. Yes, the neighbors are thrilled. And they go until about 11:30 or Igor, the custodian, warned me that there's every reason to believe that it'll be too loud to hold our meetings in that space. Anne and Patricia have been very helpful in connecting me with PS3 and with 75 more, whatever that's called. Yeah. So I'm hot on the trail of that. We're at the Sheen Center on Thursday, as you know. I wrote the wrong thing there, but that's correct. Okay. Last thing is, I think the chair already covered that, and I think I already mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I put in the same Google Drive for the district needs statement, an updated document, or actually pairs of documents that reflected the budget priorities that each of you voted on and referred to their respective agencies. The process has now come full circle, and we have received the agency's responses. In a very, very few instances, they said, yes, we can fund that from existing finances allocations. In most of the time, they give us unhelpful responses like contact the agency or more information is needed without saying from whom or what it is or anything like that. I sorted it by agency. And I also sorted it by our order of priorities, 1 through whatever it was, I think 15 or 20 for capital. And so there's 2 times 2, because there's 2 of each of those things, 1 for expense and 1 for capital. And to the extent that your committee suggested changes or budget allocations, and the response was contact the agency, it is your option to contact the agency and see what it is that they really want from you, and so forth. A lot of the descriptions were very complete, so what it is that they need is not evident from their response. That's all I've got for you, unless there are questions. Yes, I see a question.
Yeah, for the budget responses we received from OMB, what is our charter mandated role for responding to those? Because when I was listening to Borough Board, it sounded as though individual community boards had a charter mandated response to respond back to OMB, and I didn't know what that was and what are we doing? So
the charter mandate suggests that and this is new, is that we're supposed to actually write a letter that,
right.
Well, there's a letter of comment, and essentially what every community board I've ever heard of does is to write back and say, to pick a bunch of the ones that were not either not funded or not responded to appropriately, and effectively to say we really mean it. That usually takes the form of a letter. This year, OMB is taking it upon itself to say that letter should pass through full board. I know of only one community board out of 59 that's actually going to call for a full board vote. There isn't really time to do that within the time frame that we get this and then have to respond. And so OMB has agreed that they can receive our letter, which we'll just put together, and essentially they'll just rely on, and no surprises, one of the things we're going to focus in on are a lot of the things that have to do with our top priorities, like the call for an IMT team. I guess that's redundant. The intensive mental health mobility, yeah, and that one they said that they flat out did not support it being funded, and so we would reiterate our concern for our neighbors who are unhoused and the efficacy of that prompted your committee's resolution, and then say that we wish that you would reconsider. In all of my years of doing this, I have never heard of the Office of Management Budget or an agency changing its mind in the middle of all of that. If you really want, by the way, if you really do want to make an impact on these things, the next real event is that there'll be 2 sets of budget hearings at the City Council, one against the preliminary budget, which is going on in March, and then there'll be the executive budget, and then there's another round of hearings, and we can all individually go testify at those. That's how that works.
Do you need the committee chairs to write letters, or does the letter come from CB2 and you don't need the committee chair input? I'm just thinking
I'm grateful for any input you want to give, but
Okay.
it should be one letter and it
Right.
comes from the chair.
We can contribute it to make your.
So we could pass this at March, we could pass this at March full board.
I don't know that it needs to be passed. We will put it together this week and submit so that they have it. But it's not
They haven't passed it.
But we're
a.
reading points that we don't.
You've already made,
So-
exactly.
There's no new news here. This is simply repackaging what you decided in October.
It's just that all of a sudden this year, OMB had just requested, wanted, or preferred that it was a full board.
We don't do enough work.
Thank you.
Both of those things appear to be true.
Got it.
Also, Mark, thank you so much for compiling all the information on the budget responses and putting it on the website and everything. I know it's a lot of work, so thank you.
Pleasure. Trying to make it. Accessible. And we'll get started. I guess if I was going to put in a plug on this, is that it would be smart for us to think about in late spring, putting the district needs statement on your agendas so that you're not rushed in September to come up with whatever it is that you want to, and then you can actually have an opportunity to have the people who come to your meetings think about things, respond, and then give you some useful feedback that might be. So I'll work with you guys however you want to make that happen, say in May or June. July is worthless because people are executive here, their brains are not on helping us with this. I'm at the point. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Next is review of the March and future calendars. I know that schools does have to be on the 11th. We've got the outdoor dining. Is the 12th an open date? Can we move that over one? If so, would that work?
For Tuesday, the 12th, it's just that we're meeting the next week already on the next Monday as well.
If you want to keep it as Mondays, that's the only, well, then we'll have to work something out in terms of timing and doing two meetings on the same day. That's all. Because the schools has a schedule, a speaker. That's why they're locked in.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, do you? Is that going to be but there's no resolution coming out of it. Can that be just a presentation that could be done virtually? Or we'll have to work on that. Okay, okay.
A resolution.
You would have to have a quorum. Okay, well, right now, is there anybody else who has any issues besides that one with regards to the March calendar? Is there anything anybody else wants to talk about just going forward in the next months ahead of that are just for planning purposes, but if there's anything anybody wants to.
I think that since we use these tentative calendars for planning purposes, it would be helpful to post them as tentative calendars. I know that we don't vote on them until full board, but for members of different communities, it's very helpful to know the possible or the probable date, even months in advance. And
I
that
agree.
still allows us to change the date and make it final when it's final, but it's just would be really helpful if when you go to the website and you look at the following months, you actually see.
I agree. No, definitely. That's it.
I'll send in the rest of the dates. 13th,
Okay.
let me know, June 10th.
Okay. Next, okay, now let's talk about this resolution on the quorum requirement, the use of video conferencing quorum requirements. I know everyone got my version. I know that Brian submitted an alternate version. I open it up. If anybody has anything they want to say about these, Brian, do you want to talk
Yeah.
about yours first? Since
Yeah.
it's significantly different.
Well, when I read it through, it struck me that not having in-person meetings is really a setback. And it's not serving the community as well as it should. And so I didn't like the idea of making it easy for people not to show up. I just think it takes away a lot of what we do. And the other thing is that because my experience has been the city that authorizes a group to form a committee, a task force, a working group, whatever it is, like our board, they provide a space to meet. And I don't really understand why the city isn't providing it for us. But we have a regular place.
I'm sorry to laugh, but yes, this is a question that everybody who's ever served on a community board wonders why we do not get a dedicated space for our full board meetings.
But there's,
It's corollary
Yes, I'm sorry. Please continue.
funding. They pay for this office. They should be paying for our meeting spaces, not out of our budget.
That is,
I thought about that before, but Brian's point on that is something we should be. And I think somebody from the mayor's office is on, I think, isn't our representative on?
Robin is on. Yes, Robin Force is on.
oh,
I have a question.
yes,
So there's two issues at hand, right? One is we want to ask the city to provide spaces for that, which is an ask.
Funding.
And funding, which is an ask, and we may or may not get it. But there's another issue here that, I mean, the city may just shrug their shoulder, probably will just shrug their shoulders and do nothing. So we still have to deal with the question of presuming that we don't get funding spaces, what we want to do in terms of quorum. And I had a question that relates to that, which is, what does it mean not to have quorum? I know that some community boards are not allowed to hold a meeting if they don't have.
I want to be very clear. My resolution does not suggest that we eliminate a quorum requirement. It is simply talking about the idea that if you're using a video conferencing, that people who are attending the meeting through that would count as quorum just the way people are here. The goal of this resolution is not to eliminate in-person meetings. The goal of this resolution is to maximize the choices that community boards have, and that it is really each community board that is in the position to best determine what combination of in-person, hybrid, and virtual meeting formats works for it based on each month, each situation, and that by forcing us into the hybrid mode that we have now, we're really dealing with the worst possible set of situation instead of being able to choose. There were certain realities where it may be ideal to have meetings run a certain way, but in the absence of funding, and you have to sort of work with what you've got. And I have been getting feedback every single month of the frustration of people who are sitting in our meetings and not feeling like they're able to participate.
But my question is, so if we continue to require in-person participation in order to count towards quorum, I was discussing this for a while. It's likelier that there will be occasions when members of my small committee cannot attend in person, and I cannot count them for quorum. So I don't have quorum. And so my question is, what do our bylaws say about holding a meeting if we don't have quorum? Do our bylaws protect us from having a meeting even if there isn't quorum? Or because I know that different community boards do it differently.
It's not an option for anybody there's only the open meetings law sets the rules. It's not a bylaws issue. It's an open meetings law.
So you have to have quorum to post a meeting?
If to have an official meeting that counts as a committee meeting,
Yeah.
you must have the quorum as set forth by the open meetings law. And it doesn't mean you can't hold it. Now, this just happened to us. We had a major storm warning. We were told everybody should stay home. The mayor said it. Everybody was saying it. But because there was no emergency order in place for that meeting to have been considered an official meeting, it would have had to have an in-person quorum. I told everybody, nobody should be risking their safety or health to come to a meeting. That meeting was held. There were people here. It did not meet a quorum. But the fact is that when you're talking about a committee meeting, that defect can be cured because those resolutions are then presented to a board that does have a quorum, and that's the vote that counts.
So what you're saying is that if a committee is not able to not able to have quorum,
right,
it can continue to have its meeting. It can write a resolution. The people who are there, but it just means that resolution doesn't become official. That's the only cost of not having quorum at a committee meeting, is that you don't get to vote on the the resolution. Is that right? That's what I'm trying to understand.
So it's just not like codified till it goes to full board. So many boards across the city are doing this. There are boards that are fully remote. They're not even meeting in person anymore. Who are doing this, and their operations look fine to me.
Yeah, no, I just want to know what the cost is of not having quorum, because I think that requiring in-person participation will mean that there are.
Well, it is true that you can cure a quorum defect by then presenting it to the board for a proper vote. What you're also setting up is saying that your committees aren't really meeting as official committees because you're going through a practice of consciously ignoring the open meetings law. When I told Chenault, I said, this is an emergency situation, the prudent thing to do, and the borough president's office agreed with me, that you have to do what makes sense in this unusual circumstance. But if you choose to do that, what you're basically saying is that you're not really running on a committee structure and your resolutions are really not coming out of a committee. Yes, Carter, you have a.
I was gonna say, if that is the normal procedure, I think that's highly problematic. And the reason is that nobody on the
Can you
board,
refer to what you mean?
meaning if you don't have a quorum at the committee and it's presented to full board, then the reason is because there's no opportunity to hear the presentation. There's no opportunity to question the presenter because there wasn't a sufficient number of board members present. Other boards, to Mara's point, their full board often acts as a committee in the outer boroughs. And so the full board is the land use committee, for example, because they don't hear as much stuff. And so I think that on an emergency basis, like, with the snowstorm, that's very realistic, but I think it becomes problematic because nobody knows what happened. You have a couple of people there and it really opens up more issues than it solves if you don't have a quorum. I would think that one of the things we might want to do is to work with the mayor to have a separate type of emergency order that would apply to community boards whenever something happens, for example, a snow emergency. If the city declares it, why not have that count for community boards as a separate type of emergency since this is relatively new? And have that freedom that way so we can just meet fully remotely and everybody can be there.
Okay, we have a couple of questions.
I just want to point out your concern about the proper discussion is not relevant if 2 people are in the room and 10 people are on the video conferencing because they are still participating. It just doesn't count as a quorum under open meeting law. So I think that's more of important in terms of participation versus no participation. That's a separate issue. I do think the in-person aspect does create a little bit of better camaraderie and conversation. You have side conversations before, after, hopefully not during the meeting. And so it's really an issue at full board. And in terms of your comment, perhaps whatever resolution we pass, the simple thing would be encourage the city to have a emergency order that whenever the DOE closes public school to make community board that, because basically once public schools are closed, so many different places around the city, call it, and that's an easy one. And if the public schools are open, then, it's sort of a very black and white line that the city could use.
Well, if there was some sort of objective trigger.
Well, that's an
would allow it to
objective.
be.
Yeah.
The only thing is schools are open in the day and we meet in evenings and it may not, I don't know, but it's an idea.
Yeah.
Rika.
I think this is really complicated and I feel like we need a decision tree with all of the options laid out in one reso. Absent that, does it make sense to say that we'd like to abide by the open meeting law, but we need the support of the mayor's office to find space? And if we don't have that support and we can't find the space, then we want the in-person quorum rule suspended?
Here, this is a simple decision tree. There's the state law, which is open meeting law, and we need it extended because it's going to expire.
I know, but excuse me, if it's extended, we still have the requirement of the in-person quorum.
Yes,
That's what I feel is the stumbling block here.
yeah. And then the separate issue is the city one where we need funding. So I think everyone agrees we need funding. I think everyone agrees it should be extended. So I think the discussion here is the quorum issue, in-person quorum.
Okay, all right,
Again-
that's a very good way to lay it out.
There's nothing about suspending the quorum requirement that would preclude us from having in-person meetings. In fact, by having a maximum flexibility, we can pass our own rules about how we want, how often, we want to have an in-person meeting or any of those kinds of things. The point is that we should be in the driver's seat in terms of what works best for us and what situations that we experience that other boards may not experience are going to trigger a need to have flexibility. The whole point here is not to get rid of a quorum requirement, it's just to simply say that, something, it's like, there are some times that a purely virtual meeting is the logical thing to do.
Okay.
And it would also make it easier if there was no quorum requirement. Even if you do a hybrid, we could much more likely to do a hybrid out of this room, because then you could set up laptops and cameras and you could have people online. Everybody would be online, but you would have an actual presence, which would then no longer necessitate having to go elsewhere. And well, Brian, I understand the idea of securing spaces, but there are no government facilities here in CB2, those kind of spaces to ask for. So we would have to actually pay rent to some entity. So that would require the increase in the budget. It's not like CB1, that's their lucky thing, is that they use the borough president space. But there just aren't the spaces for us to go get. So, get harder.
There's a couple of things and first of all, I think it's a tremendous disservice to the public if people can't come physically to a meeting. This is one of the most things that people just feel so disconnected, so uncomfortable. And we saw that at our first in-person SLA meeting when the public said, this is great. We can see you. People met their neighbors with similar concerns. They could communicate. That's so, I can't even, and I think to remove that requirement of having an in-person in an appropriate facility that can handle enough people coming is critical to what we do. So that's one thing. Secondly, the city should be paying. If we have a contract and rent another space, that's an extension of our office space. We're not able to have a meeting facility that can accommodate the full board. In fact, the more I think about this, we have conflicts with many of the places who give us space because they're giving us something of value. And oftentimes we review matters that are involved in. So, that actually gives us a good distance in paying for the space. But, and lastly, we haven't yet had any meetings that could be held up as a standard of a hybrid meeting. And I doubt that would ever be removed by the state, that you don't have a physical presence. So in some way, shape, or form, there would be a hybrid requirement of a physical location. And if it's not this room, it's a crapshoot on whether or not that's going to work. And the biggest thing is we can't hear anybody. And so when you barely can hear them, you have no idea what's going on. We had 2 elected officials talking at the same time for quite some time at our last meeting. I mean, and so it just seems premature to be jumping ahead on this, on something that we're just woefully unprepared to handle. And that's where it goes back to the funding from the city, where we could, if they provided for us in a better manner to conduct our public meetings, I think you could give more serious consideration to this. But at this point, it just seems very premature to be asking for it. And, I guess I'll leave it at that.
Amy, yes.
Suggesting that we add to this resolution at some point that they give us funding so that we can find a space that we can meet in every single month. So we can understand the technology and we can build up. Is that, I mean, I'm just.
Yeah, the biggest pushback, right, all of our full board meetings for many of our accommodations is paying for the staffers at that location. And that's provided to us without fee, maybe not all the time, but I don't know recently. And, you know, like, for example, when we were meeting at Scholastic, you know, they required an in-house person to stay there, but we didn't pay them. There was no funding that paid the security people or anything. But if that's provided, I think the equation changes where it's a much more neutral situation for the other entity where we're hosting the museum, but they may not be making money on us, but they're, at least it's a more neutral situation.
If I'm understanding. That we might request of this that they fund us so that we can have a consistent place to hold a meeting every month. We could address a lot of the issues that Mark has, constant trying to figure out what's going on. But you might write an amendment that.
I just find it premature without having thought that through, because we that's the main problem.
I think I would also like to say, and I've talked to Susan about it.
Yeah.
Oh, what's. Thank you. I'm sorry. I had spoken to Susan about this. What were, no, I was add to that, but I meant to. I find wanting to go to quorum that it's not in person can be a slippery slope to more and more people not showing up at meetings. And, you know, if I take this to the nth degree, not that I'm saying this is going to happen tomorrow, but if I take us to the, like, a thought experiment to the nth degree, we could have Mark in an auditorium with not one community board member there to follow the letter of the law. In which case, I can remember a gentleman who came here who was denied housing that he obviously deserved to get. There's nothing like the impact of interacting directly with the community and hearing directly with them. I also think that, you know, as secretary, I know what we record for each member. It is, did you show up at the meeting? And did you vote? And did you stay until the end of the meeting? The only requirement for a community board member is to go to 3 meetings in person a month and vote and stay till the end of the meeting. So to eliminate that requirement by not having in-person quorum, I think it really changes the whole nature of what we're doing. And I think as government officials, I know that we're very unimportant ones, but as government officials, I think we should be physically available. They can see our faces and see who we are. Because I feel that's the basis of democracy. So I'm against getting rid of the in-person quorum.
Okay. Yes, Suzanne.
I wanted to just, in response to Carter, offer the other perspective, which is there are many times, one of the lessons of COVID is that we had a lot more participation in many meetings because people had an at-home option. And what?
And no other options.
Oh, that's true. But it was one of the benefits, right? We would not have chosen that experience, but that experiment, but we had it. And I found in my puny little committee that I got so much more participation. And I think it actually served the public a lot more than requiring people to come wherever it is. I agree that there are incidentals and in-person meetings that you don't get from a Zoom. But I think that it would be wonderful if each community board had the opportunity to decide for itself what that balance is. I think, yeah, that's what I think.
Okay.
And I would just say, I understand that issues with hybrid and my heart bleeds for Mark every meeting. But I do agree that having hybrid does allow more public, for more of the public to participate. I'm not against hybrid meetings. Right. I am advocating to keep it.
And the point I wanted to in opposition to that is that there are times, I mean, I have a small committee, 3 people are out of town traveling, they could participate in the meeting. by Zoom, but if I don't have a quorum, then suddenly the meaning of this meeting, this is what I was trying to understand, like, what is the meaning of a meeting that doesn't have quorum? And it's not clear to me that it is regarded in the same way. So I feel that their participation by Zoom is just as valuable. And I like the opportunity to be able to decide. And also, I think that if it were up to us to decide, we would probably want to have some rules about the whole board having to show up at least, you know, not every single time, most times or whatever, because
Nothing,
of those
nothing, if we have flexibility, nothing prevents us from then establishing our own rules in terms of what we want to see. And a committee, for example, a committee chair would continue to have the right to have an in-person only or have a hybrid. The point is one of flexibility. And yes, it would be great to have funding. We have needed funding for you know, to hold a proper, you know, for proper locations for full board meetings since forever. What are the chances that we're going to get it? I think what I was attempting to do is deal with the reality of the situation that we're in. It's not necessarily an ideal, but it's a question of trying to maximize people's participation. And the truth is that being able to be online is greater accessibility. Yeah, Carter.
When we have an hybrid, it doesn't preclude people from participating remotely right now. But it requires the main elements of the committee to be in person. And that's the point of the public participating and feeling as if they're here. We don't even enforce the rules on people who are hybrid. I mean, most people have their cameras off, you know, for most.
So
And
that's going to stop. We will be making an announcement.
But I just bring that up because I think it's important for the public to be able to face, you know, the board members come and see what's happening. And that's an important element that if you remove the requirement as it seems to be proposed, it can, you know, where is that decision making? And it suddenly becomes that it's all virtual and nobody, you know, the public may be able to watch our meetings more efficiently, but I don't think it's as comfortable to participate, frankly, because people are not able to see who else wants to comment or what's happening, be able to talk to them, whatever it may be.
Matt has his hand up, so I guess we see you. We'd love to see your face as well.
All right, it's
Go ahead.
so whether we have a quorum dictates whether a meeting is under OML, but it's not a violation of OML to gather less than the number of people that make quorum in a room, you know, virtual or otherwise. So if you have quorum, you have to follow OML, but if you don't have quorum, you don't have to follow OML.
I don't know that that's true. All that means is that if you don't have a quorum, you can't recognize it as the official actions of the body. It doesn't mean that any other OML requirements are therefore dispensed with.
Because committees are not the full body, no committee meeting is a meeting of the full body. And so I would agree with you on full board meetings, but for committee meetings, it's whether the meeting counts as whether open meeting law applies to it or not.
Right, so changing the rule to allow a quorum, to allow people participating by Zoom to be part of the quorum would foster the officialness of every committee. Does that make sense?
Whether it's a meeting under OML is not related to our bylaws. Whether something can come before full board as the committee's action is a function of bylaws. And those two things are, I think, I would argue, are distinct. Like you could have something that is a product of a meeting that didn't meet the requirements of open meetings law, but it does meet the requirements of our bylaws for the business because the board itself hasn't taken any action. It wouldn't take any action under normal circumstances.
That would just, it would just.
Contrary.
It's also the character,
You can just read it.
okay, we have language.
Committees and subcommittees of these entities are also included within the definition. Consequently, city councils, town boards, village board of trustees, school boards, commissions, legislative bodies, and committees and subcommittees consisting of members of these groups all fall within the framework of the law.
That's open meetings law?
Yes,
Yeah, and my point is that if you gather less than the number of you have less than half of a committee meeting, it's not a meeting per opens meeting law, and therefore you can't have a violation of open meeting law.
Yeah, but it's not.
I don't know, please, I do not call out. I don't know that that's true. All I'm saying is that body that has gathered, that doesn't have the quorum, cannot be recognized as a meeting of that entity. It doesn't mean that to the extent there are other provisions of the law, that those also go away.
Correct, but that doesn't really make, if we hold, one, I wouldn't suggest that we hold a non-official meeting, right? I think whatever the requirements are, I think the requirements
Yeah,
are. And
I
that's,
completely agree. This is also is dealing with situations like what we just had, whereas the prudent thing to do is to hold the unofficial meeting, because otherwise we're putting people in jeopardy. I mean, it's like, there may be a way to figure out how to request some sort of have some sort of path to the exception that is consistent and is triggered by certain events. But, did you have something?
Well, the exception was what I was thinking of, is that right now, you fulfill a quorum, certain people who have disabilities or whatever are allowed to be online.
Which is
And
expressly
then-
allowed by the
Now,
law.
there are exceptions, so I think of it as exceptions. There are times when people are ill for the one.
That's
time
the
of
other
meeting.
exception that's also laid
And-
out in the law.
Is that laid out in the law?
Yes, it is. Those are the two categories, the qualifying disability and the extraordinary circumstance. So to both recognized expressly under the statute.
Okay, you're right, extraordinary circumstance, how extraordinary.
Well, you're supposed to read
A bad cold, say,
Okay.
just for.
It's just yes, health issues are considered to be one of those. You have to read the explanatory text that goes with that. But yes, that's one of the traditional basis for it.
We haven't followed that.
Well, we don't police each other. If somebody says that they're unable to attend and they have a reason, but we accept it. Same thing, we don't police people.
So that but they're not counted as part of the quorum.
Look, for example, the big
And if
issue
you
would
leave
be,
quorum, that would
the big
be,
issue would have been if we had a storm situation on the night of a full board. What would happen then? Either you would try to reschedule the meeting, which is not, or you would hold a meeting that's unofficial, then have to have an emergency, a truncated emergency meeting simply to ratify the actions at the first meeting so that it would be legitimate. Yeah.
I'm just looking at this stuff. So the meeting is defined as the official convening of a public body for the purpose of conducting public business. When we don't have a quorum, we're still trying to do that because date sensitive issues or whatever it may be, people may not physically be present for a quorum, but a quorum is made. And I think that's the key understanding thing, that we're in an emergency situation, looking backwards, not forwards. We want to conduct it properly, but there's something that came in the way. That doesn't mean we don't do it. We were trying to be as transparent as possible with the public. That's like one of the most important things. Everything we do is being transparent. And so all this talk of the other way, we're actually erring on this other side of trying to do it properly. And that's where the definition of emergency, we should explore expanding.
Well, okay, let's take a more, and then I want to get back specifically to this. What do people want to do with this resolution? Do they want to, we can table it and we can have discussion on it further. Somebody have suggestions to editing it, what have you, but I want to keep it back on this. Yes, Amy. Amy, please step closer.
You want to say yours?
A direct response to what you just said. I would, like this, resolution to be tabled and reconsidered, and I think, thinking about including Carter's idea where we tie, allowing virtual meetings with quorum when there's an emergency announced by the city or the state. I think that might meet the needs of what you're saying, and we tie it to something very specific so that we don't get on that slippery slope where people just stop showing up. So it would, based on what you've said, that might meet your needs.
Okay, I'm just throwing that out there. Did you have something, Susanna?
I thought we were gonna vote on this and I was happy to vote on it.
Katie has her hand up.
Am I live? Oh, I am.
Are very live.
know, thank you. As someone with a qualifying disability, I appreciate the ability to participate safely. And I would hope that, whatever we're working on still allows people to participate, because this winter has been very dangerous for people. And, there's some of us who've been able to do as much as we could. Donna, does meet in person, and I attend those meetings in person, but that space seems safe. And some of the spaces that we've been in aren't as safe feeling. So, there's a balance, and I just wanted to be sure that I expressed my opinion and my need.
Okay. Mar, did you have your hand up for something?
I just wanted to agree with what Susanna.
Yes, Brian.
I just want to reassure you, in my reading, none of these discussions, none of these changes, or if we pass this resolution without amendments, none of that would in any way impact any
Correct.
kind of special disability.
Correct. That's part of the statute. We cannot alter that. I just want to point
But
out.
then I want to follow up after Emma.
Okay, and tabling that is a fine option. I just want to remind everybody, there is a sunset provision in the current law. It runs through June. If nothing happens, all hybrid and all virtual components do go away. So that is part of the, yes, Emma.
Thank you. No, Katie, do you want to finish your thought, Katie? Okay, it's different. Okay. Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say, I think this discussion has been so helpful for me. I will say, when I read the initial resolution, it read to me as less than enthusiastic about in-person meetings. And I think if we could just even suggest that the board is trying to provide flexibility to meet in-person needs of the public and also virtual needs of the public, I think that sounds like something that many folks at the table have sort of spoken to. And I think as written, I'm understanding now the context that this resolution emerged from, and it makes a lot of sense to me. But my read, absent of this thoughtful discussion, felt like there was potential danger to like in-person spaces that might be held for folks. That's my thought. But again, really grateful for the thoughtfulness of this discussion.
Great. Let me go back to Katie and then I'll go to you, Valerie.
Just one thing. Are we still considering, supporting the state action to, not sunset the open meetings law on June 30th, 2024?
I don't know what that's what I'm saying. I'm wondering if maybe, tabling this and giving more people a chance to weigh in, to sort of contemplate this may be a better option. And then we revisit this in March. Yes, Valerie.
What are our state legislators advocating for? I know that Senator Hoylman and more majority of our district had a big hand in this amendment to the open meetings law.
Right.
And so what are they advocating for? Are there any other new bills on the legislative agenda that would impact the prevention of the sunsetting of this or the extension of it? And do we have those answers? That's
a good question. I do know that Senator Hoylman Siegel's bill went nowhere. It just sort of died at some point in the process. I do believe there was another legislator that had something similar, but also it didn't seem to progress. I would have to look into that. That's another thing that if we revisit this, I could provide you with those answers.
And then I would say if we are going to move to table this, putting this as an agenda item, if this is gonna come up at exec on the calendar so that the public, if they have any comments on it, might be a good idea.
Call that out at the board meeting then. Should we discuss it? Is what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, just, it seems as though that's what you want to hear.
To simplify, just before we table it, I think we should just identify whether some of the open issues, right, to make it easier, because it's too many open things makes it impossible for us to deal with again next month. So one option is to extend what currently is, right? So keep that going.
With the hybrid.
Just exactly how it is without a sunset, right? The second is to sunset it entirely. The third is the quorum. So these are three different things. So are there other issues open so that it can be better described to the board members? Because this conversation, I think,
There's two
are
parts.
arranging, so.
There is the issue of the quorum and the operation of the meeting, and then there is funding.
That's city and that's state.
Yeah, I'm just to deal with the, I'm just making this digestible.
Okay.
Because the funding is also a part, because we need the funding in order to
Yes.
do other parts, but we may not have a resolution on that by the end of this legislative session, which is where they have to address this. So that doesn't mean we can't ask for it and then not use it. But the board, to have a position, you have to give some options to the board members. I would think to not repeat this conversation over again. And I think that might be helpful, going forward. And the funding is something we should ask for irrespective.
Oh,
Because most people may not realize funding, and Mark can probably better speak to this, doesn't come for paying for this office out of our budget.
right.
That's a key element.
Okay.
Mhm.
Also, we don't have funding to pay for all the extra hours the office staff putting in, right, okay, never mind. So, yeah, perhaps we could put together a small group to work on this and reach out to community board members to get input or write something down. I don't want to leave it just on you, Susan.
I think maybe the best thing is to table it and we can talk about this. This is not something we have to continue to talk about within the committee. I will make a motion, I can make a motion to table it.
I'll make a motion to table it.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm gonna withdraw the motion. It's my resolution, I can.
Brian's was on the floor.
Oh. Okay, so Brian, yes, you have a question.
The question is if I have other community boards comment on this, do we know? And what's it?
I brought this up and I said that that I felt that every single board should be addressing this and that there should be some sort of uniform response. I was making the assumption that people wanted maximum flexibility and maybe there isn't, but there has to be some sort of an acknowledgement that we do not function the way agencies that have funding and dedicated space and all these other things, and that there has to be some recognition of that. So that was what I had said. I don't know who else is taking this. Yeah.
Well, so if we can, move to table this discussion.
You can withdraw your own motion.
I withdraw.
Okay, and I withdraw my motion. So we are going. This will be on next month's agenda, and by all means, everybody has something to contribute. Please send it in. Okay, the resolution on Beth Israel.
Yeah, so this will also constitute my report. So as you know, Beth Israel Hospital, Mount Sinai has filed a closure plan to close Beth Israel Hospital, and that has to be approved by the state. We tried to have a meeting about this in February, and I was excited about it because the New York State Department of Health was going to attend. They haven't attended anything public. But there was also at the same time a lawsuit, which may be the best hope of preventing this closure for now. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. That was filed like the day before our meeting. And the moment a lawsuit is filed, no one will ever talk again. So we canceled our meeting, sadly, but felt that it was important for CB2 to go on the record somehow in the absence of a public meeting.
Just as a point of fact, because it was canceled, there was no official meeting of Human Services. That's why this resolution is coming through exec, because there was no action taken by the committee.
Right. Thank you. So this resolution, I guess, is voted on at executive and then will be presented to the full board. And essentially what it says after all the whereases is that we oppose this because there are so many unanswered questions. That's essentially what it says. And that we worry a lot about the gaps in services, both temporary and permanent, that would be produced by the closure of Beth Israel. I'm happy to explain, discuss.
Does anybody have anything on this that they want to bring up at this time? Sure, if you step up to the microphone.
You're getting, I'm learning.
Thanks for writing this, Susan. I think it's Susanna. Now I've got it there.
Maybe we should switch.
Yes, I know the difference. It's sometimes not great with names. Which I know you've all noticed, so I'm sorry about that. But you know, I know that they've been closing down buildings at Beth Israel for years. I also have a very good friend who was a nurse at Beth Israel, and she's been telling me for 15 years they're closing Beth Israel. So I find it really disingenuous of our elected officials that I'm surprised that this is happening, because they've been talking about this forever, and I'm curious what your perspective is.
Yeah, so we were not officially notified a closure plan. So there have been many conversations about Mount's MSDI wanting to close Beth Israel Hospital. There was a whole round of conversations about this back before the pandemic. And I think at that time, because my memory is horrible, that there was discussion of like replacing the big clunky hospital with something small. I don't know. Anyway, we're now post-pandemic. This has come up again. The MSBI, Mount Sinai Beth Israel, is required, if they want to close the hospital, and they do, they are required to file a closure plan with the state, and the state has to approve it. There were a couple of, I've been attending the one public meeting that MSBI had with the whole public. They've also had meetings at the various community boards. And I've attended also a bunch of meetings that have been happening on Mondays with a bunch of interested people, union representatives, lawyers, community board representatives, and so on and so forth. One of the things that has come up out of that, and what was pointed out, and I've also been looking at the resolutions that were passed by other community boards, particularly Community Board 5 and Community Board 3. So this business, for example, in whereas number 3, it cites that since Mount Sinai took over Beth Israel in 2013, it's been closing all of these departments. And Beth Israel, MSBI, in this public meeting was touting $1 billion of investment that they have made in opening various centers downtown. So there's a new behavioral health center on Rivington Street. There's a cancer center. There's a urgent care center. So they've touted those as substitutes and replacements that are more efficient and better serve the public. But one of the arguments that the positions among the public have been that they're crying poor now. They're saying that Beth Israel lost $150 million this year. Their MSBI's bond rating has been demoted. And what many people have raised is, well, you closed all these departments in Beth Israel, which were the ones that were making the money. So was this part of your plan all along to close these things, reduce the census, reduce the revenue, and then say, gee, we have to close. We don't know the answer to that because we didn't get a chance to ask it of NDOH. So we raised this. And then everything else in the whereas is primarily, first of all, annoyance that they didn't consider us part of the community that needed to be notified. They notified CBs 3 and 6. By law, they had to notify the community in September. They filed their closing plan in October. We point out that many of that while the new facilities MSBI has opened are great, they don't really substitute for others. There's no psychiatric emergencies, there's no pediatric emergencies, and are other things that will disappear if BI closes. And then we point out that according to the guidelines that have been given to facilities who want to close, it's the responsibility of the closing facility to determine, to ensure that there will continue to be adequate access to healthcare. Well, that to me is a conflict of interest, right? Like, we want to close. Do you have enough room? Great, that's great. Yeah, we've assured everyone's got. So we want to make sure that the state is having a role in verifying those claims. And then we wonder, what does access mean? Because if you saturate these other facilities and a wait in the waiting room of the ER goes from 2 hours to 8 hours, is that still considered access? You know, like, how do you define access? We just raised all these things. We point out like what's going to be lost if BI closes. And then we just say, in the absence of answers to all these questions, we strongly oppose approval of the closure plan.
Yes, Carter.
Question, when St. Vincent's closed, did they rely on what Mount Sinai provided in order to say there's a continuity of care?
I have no idea.
Maintained, and then they have the standalone, obviously, emergency room.
I have no idea.
How did that, because that's, to me, is a continuation of assets, right? The land, buildings versus using them, the public interest, but
well, I mean,
there's a lot of disappointment when Vincent's closed, especially the luxury housing, and they had some things they left, but.
Well, a couple of things. I don't know the St. Vincent's process as intimate as well as I know this, and I can't actually claim to know this intimately. I guess in theory, you could say, look, it's a big hulking building that's really expensive to maintain. And we know that nationwide and statewide, there's a lot less reliance on beds. And so maybe this is the most efficient way to provide healthcare, to close down one hospital and open up a bunch of satellites. We're not making a claim. And if they want to sell that real estate and use it to enhance their services, that might be a good thing. We don't know. And we're not making a claim about it.
One thing I will point out is that every time a hospital closes, the ripple effects in terms of its impact on what the community is keeps growing. When you had multiple hospitals and you closed, then the remaining ones serve. But when you are down to like, this is the last hospital, except for what's all the way downtown or what's all the way uptown, that the service community that is serviced by it has grown so much that the dynamics of the situation have changed. And that's part of, I think, what you're trying to address and why we were frustrated that they didn't approach us, because we consider ourselves part of the service community, the community that's serviced by Beth Israel, because of the absence of the other hospitals like St. Vincent's. Yes, Katie.
One of the things that was most noticeable when St. Vincent's closed, it gets lost in these discussions, is that the doctors who were in our neighborhood that we could walk to also left. You know, it's because there's no hospital for them to associate with. They don't have offices, and it's a very negative impact on the community that's not captured in any of this, any of the official figures. But
well, actually, though, I would say that Mount Sinai has pointed out they have a whole faculty practice downtown. I mean, they have built a lot of new infrastructure. So And we're not I'm not really, I don't have the expertise to determine what those answers, whether that works or not. We wanted answers from the state. We wanted just to make sure that the state is doing its job in overseeing and making sure that this.
And I understand that totally. I was just pointing out,
Yeah, I think really right now, though, the question is simply, we need to have the questions asked. We need to get official answers. I mean,
We're not gonna get.
I don't know what else we can do except to like keep saying that these are unanswered questions.
I think this is a great resolution.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a continuation of what we keep seeing is that private entities take advantage of the significant increase in real estate values in our community, go somewhere else, even though we have one of the densest areas, and walk away. And we see it over and over again. And it leaves us then saying, why don't we have these facilities? And this is across the board, is that the underlying asset is they're use that money, put it towards their endowments, other, activities elsewhere where the land is cheaper, but is it actually cheaper to operate
Are
somewhere
you
else?
proposing a change to the resolution or just discussing?
Well, no, my point is that this keeps coming up over and over as an underlying issue.
Okay, yeah, I'm not gonna change the resolution.
Is there any objections to voting on this resolution at this time? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions or recusals? Okay, thank you very much. And this conversation, I'm sure, is not over. Let's get to, well, yeah. That's, let's get to our standing committee. Do we have an arts and culture working group report? I don't know if Ivy is. Oh, thank you very much. Okay, cannabis did not meet. Do you have anything you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, it's slow, probably till the summer.
Low is good.
So I can share that they just issued 38 new dispensary licenses, 109 licenses total, including cultivators, micro businesses, and processor licenses. Some of the licenses that came in this past week were also those provisional ones. So, we had 2 AU rounds. One was December deadline, one was November deadline. The November deadline was with property, proof of control property. The December deadline was without. And they issued a bunch of those. One in our district, Loon Lee on Kenmare Street was approved under the provisional AU license. So we got one out of the 38.
Okay.
And it'll be slow until I'm guessing the summer. So.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Since there was no, we already did our human services. Land use?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm here. We had 2 matters on our agenda. The first matter was a 10-year, which is a normal time, 10-year extension of an existing variance on Christopher Street. After much discussion with the applicant, he agreed to go back and do more notice in the building. And so that item was laid over till March. And we'll get a little more community input, we hope. The second item is called the Green Fast Track for Housing, which is another, it's a rules-making effort by the administration. Is coming from the Department of City Planning, but it's sort of another of the City of Yes kind of initiatives. And the original response date was, I think, Saturday, February 17th, but thank you to Frederica, who suggested that we ask for an extension because that didn't comport with our board rhythm and calendar. We have until Friday to respond. And there is a resolution now on Google Drive, and our committee members have been looking at it. We met last week. We agreed on the structure of it, and we're getting feedback as we go. We are following the questions and criticisms and concerns of the Municipal Art Society as to the details of this plan. And so there we have it.
Great.
Any-
Okay, landmarks.
For that committee, a brief report, we had 5 applications. Well, I think they'll come through. This is the meeting that they're during the snowstorm, and so we didn't have an in-person forum. So there was pretty much a recommendation for approval with notes, except the one on the Dos Caminos on Houston and West Broadway. But so they wanted to build a structure that wasn't a structure because it doesn't fall into a building category for the Department of Buildings because it's outside, it's not conditioned, it doesn't have a foundation or basement, it's just more or less like one of our street sheds, kind of closed in street shed. So but we just felt it was too heavy and too heavy looking, didn't have any historic character to it, reflection of the neighborhood. So we also had one item that was a request for a comment, I guess, or a recommendation for a place on Broadway that was up for, it was from the New York State Department of Preservation. 21 Broadway. 821 Broadway. It's a very fine, very well-maintained corner building at the corner of Broadway and West 13th, I believe, or right just south of Union Square. So we did make the recommendation that we support it, and that's about all we could do with that. Those will come up with the full board.
Okay, thank you. Open restaurants.
Sure. So we're the outdoor dining working group, and the Dining Out NYC, which is the permanent program, the application portal will open on Saturday, March 3rd. So we are fine-tuning our workflow here for processing all of those applications. We have 40 days to review sidewalk cafe applications as mandated by the rules, 30 days to comment on roadway cafe, and every single roadway cafe application will have a DOT public hearing. So that is not a question. It's whether or not for the sidewalk cafe, whether or not DOT elects to hold that public hearing. And there's a set of criteria and rules that outline that. Operators will have until Saturday, August 3rd to apply for the Dining Out NYC program for this season. Between March 3rd, when that application portal opens, and August 3rd, once an operator is approved, they have 30 days to come into compliance. And then currently right now, what's out on the street is LPC, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, has their own set of proposed rules regarding outdoor dining, and those are out for comment right now. The public hearing for that by DOT is on March 19th. And I've distributed those rules along with some slides and different comments from the LPC public meeting on that too. And that will probably be brought up at Landmarks, and we will probably submit our comment on that if we have any following the March full boards that we will also address in the working group meetings. We have 2 meetings on the 11th and the 18th. And again, those are to process the application so we can have them before, potentially before full board, depending on when those come into the office.
Okay, parks. Okay, Rich.
Yeah, just unmuting here. We had a meeting without any resolutions. We had two parts. One was a discussion from the Parks Department about open projects. There are really two big ones. There are a series of projects going around down by Duarte Square and Grand Canal. And there's the discussion of the space that's being developed at 388 Hudson. You can read about it in the notes. And the second one, which might be of interest to people, was the discussion by Hudson River Park of a new marine operator. That was the discussion. They announced that Hornblower is out. And there's a new one in there that was chosen after an RFP and proposals were received. It's New York Water Tours. And they came, their founder, their president, their head of operations, their council, and they gave a presentation and they told about their history. They described their safety record and they talked about how they are going to operate and what they're going to do to address any community concerns. Now, this is an important relationship for HRPT. It's a big portion of their budget, so they had expended a lot of time and effort. There had also been many complaints from neighbors in previous years, so they were careful about this. Our committee members and members of the community conveyed our appreciation for their efforts and celebrated what appears to be a success. We were impressed by the people from New York Water Tours. Katie, if I've said anything incorrect, please correct me, but we're hopeful that this is going to be good for the neighborhood and for Hudson River Park.
It was a very good meeting. Thank you, Rich. And,
Good news.
More in the notes, but it was good. We're hopeful. We were unable to get a free dinner cruise for the board.
You're not allowed to accept it anyway.
Oh, yes, you're right. That's what it was. Yeah, that's true. No, hopefully it'll be.
On your parade. Yeah, Katie.
I would say we might ask for a meeting on the board. The advisory council of the HRPT once had a meeting on I don't know if it was Hornblower or the one before. So it's a free space. Maybe they would provide free space for
yeah,
board.
It's a good call. That's great. Yeah. Now it's important to note that these operators will next come to the SLA committee, so you'll hear about them again. And they agreed to come back once we get going. A lot of this runs in the summer, obviously, and we can hear from them again.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Schools.
Okay, we met in January. And our topic was ensuring inclusive and safe school environments for all students. The committee discussed Department of Education regulations for students, staff, and faculty, and guidelines for parent leaders that sit on SLTs, PTAs, CECs. And we wrote a resolution that advocates for clear guidelines and penalties for parent leaders regarding discrimination, harassment, intimidation, and bullying of students, transgendered students, and so forth.
Which is how for all students.
All students, yeah. And our resolution outlines that. And then for March, we didn't meet in February. We have a meeting in March with Lainey Hameson, who will discuss the presentation of the class size law, and then we'll accompany a resolution to follow that.
Great.
That's it.
Thank you. SLA.
We had our two meetings, SLA 1, we heard 8 applications. And there's just one, this NoHo Neighbors at 54 Great Jones, which we're recommending denial of. They had come in January and the committee recommended denial, but they asked to come back after meeting with the neighbors. They did all of that, and the committee is still recommending denial. The neighbors were a lot of neighbors showed up representing a number of different buildings. The hours are late. It was a previously licensed space with a lot of issues, including venting and noise from people outside. They're expanding the space. The venting cannot be fixed, or according to everyone, and it's more space and later hours. So people are less happy than they were with the original applicant, who is no longer going to be there.
So that's that one. What I do want to say I was surprised about is at 210 Bowery, there's a Japanese grilled meat place going in there. And they had asked if they could Zoom in, and I said, we're not doing our meetings via Zoom. So they Zoomed with the community because the applicant's in Japan and couldn't show up, and it ended up that the applicant did show up at our meeting. So I'm always pleased when somebody goes out of their way to do that. They had a good meeting with the community. So hopefully that all goes through. I think they were looking at that for a number of years. SLA2, we heard 7 applications, and 2 of them withdrew at the meeting. They'll probably be back, but one was a class change, and they're going to go through the summer and see how they operate. And another one was change of method of operation where they hadn't met with any of the people in the building. So I think they're going to try to do that and see if it's worth coming back or not. And that's it.
Thank you. Street activities. Well,
Oh, you're cute.
yes.
People can hear me.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. So we had a very productive meeting this month. We had SAPO come in over Zoom, and they spent like 2 hours with us. So it was a lot of time. They are now relatively fully staffed. They have a new head of SAPO who joined last year. And they said they're still a little bit understaffed in general, but it's better than it has been, where they had a temporary director for over a year. We brought up a number of the main issues and concerns that CB2 has brought up over the last couple of years with regard to street activities. And we covered a huge range of topics. There's no formal resolution yet on this portion. Honestly, I'm still kind of mulling over the best response to it, but just to give a summary, a couple of things we covered. So process is a big one. One of the concerns we've raised is the amount of time that we have between certain applications. So street activity small, street activity medium, some of the plaza activities. The timing doesn't work out to see the committee meeting as well as a full board meeting before that event happens. So what a lot of and that's ingrained in the city rules, so it's very difficult to change. What others have done they have set up the ability for the board to respond in the portal to those applications, but it would probably require us to pass as a full board sort of a generic authorization for that, subject to certain criteria. Yeah. So a big thing that we're going to have to discuss in future meetings is what those criteria are. But apparently that's how most other boards are doing it, is they've authorized, Mark or the district manager to put in on behalf of the board, comments right away without a full resolution. So that's probably how we're going to have to move forward with that process item. Some of the other things we covered were enforcement. So in the system, there is a way to see complaints and violations on past events, which we weren't aware that was something that they tracked. So that's good to know. They basically said we can just email them any issues that we have with photos, if we have them, are the best. And then those get logged in the system as a violation. And so that's something that those who have access to the system, which right now is the district manager, and we're trying to get me access, but we'll see if that works. But those with access can go in and see violations, among other things. And yeah, that's another point on the process side is you need a cb.gov address to access the SAPO system. And it's been very tough for me to get that. They usually only give it out to board chairs.
We all have one, everybody. We were.
I think we had the .org though.
And no,
I've got one, but it took me effort to get it. It wasn't like.
Official city.
.orgs are all given.
So everyone's entitled to a .org email address, and I tried very hard for Will to get a cb.nyc.gov, or failing that, something like info@cb.nyc.gov. So
Yeah,
only
there's a
one
few options.
and we were turned down cold. I said, no way,
I didn't know.
except they didn't say it that nice.
So it just makes everything unfortunately less efficient, and I don't know of a better way to get around it right now because Florence has to send me a massive, basically Excel pull of every event because I can't go into the system myself. And so we can't fix that, then that's still going to be an issue. That being said, we can still pass as a board authorization for comments. We'll lay out parameters that we can then authorize Mark to comment on in the system, or Florence or whoever. So I think that's the path forward. I mean, honestly, some kind of handbook for CB2 street events is probably something I would want to create in the future. And so that could include what we pass as sort of generic guidelines for each different type of event, signed off by the full board, and maybe just generic info as well, because like we're now like accumulating a lot of knowledge, having spoken to SAPO. We're going to have more conversations with them in the future. And so getting this all on paper onto a handbook, I think is probably a good idea. And so we touched on enforcement, we touched on process. We touched on the fact that you basically need a rules change to change the timeline. And the other thing that they told us is essentially embedded in the rules is they told us that they're generally not allowed to discriminate against commercial events. And that's been an issue that we've had where we've complained about commercial events. And they basically said, look, if it meets all our guidelines, if we've deemed it's not going to be a massive disruption, if NYPD signed off, then like we're not going to just deny a commercial event because it's a commercial event. And so that's something we'll have to sort of take into account, but that was the feedback that they gave us. We can continue to hold the view as a board, I think, and like we can ask for, that to be changed in the future, but under the current rules guidelines, that's basically what they're telling us. And those are the main points. I mean, there were some other smaller things, but that's where we are now. That this is not going to be a resolution this month because there's more work to do. We need to obviously, have more meetings on what's going to go into guidelines/handbook. But that was the main focus of our meeting. I mean, we had some regular way applications, nothing really to flag there, but yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious. You said it was a really optimistic meeting.
Well, I don't know. I was informative.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, did you get the feeling that they were less rigid in terms of responding to us? Because my impression has always been that they just go and do what they want to do anyhow.
They at least seemed to be very open to our input. I mean, there were a few specific examples of past events, for instance, where we deemed it was like a safety concern and they took it into account. But they said, look, you can't really comment on commercial versus non-commercial, but anything else like sidewalk crowding, if something could be in a no standing zone, local conditions on the ground, at least like the feeling they were giving to us was, oh yes, you can comment on that. And another thing is, for instance, certain events, like if they're only doing like a sidewalk closure on one side of a block, that automatically goes into this bucket of street event small, which is a 14-day time requirement. But if it's a sidewalk closure and they're going to have a celebrity, then like that's something that SAPO needs to know because that would require more advanced planning. So it's like they told us that stuff automatically goes into these buckets, but like they do rely on the community boards to point out stuff like that would say maybe this isn't really a street event, shouldn't qualify as a street event small. So stuff like that. Yeah. And they said they're very open to complaints, feedback, violations. They said just record everything you can, send it to them in an email, and it'll go into the system. And they told us they do take that into account. So like if we know of someone that's had multiple violations, that should be in their system, but they also said please flag it to them.
I just want to get Eugene because he's got his hand up.
Oh, thanks. Well, that's actually very informative. I'm kind of curious what the reaction was when you mentioned that, they didn't make a distinction with commercial events. What is that going to change the committee's future resolutions on this? Did they actually frame it as a discrimination against commercial events? Because we're talking about, public space being used for.
Yeah.
That's kind of always been kind of the tension, hasn't it?
They didn't frame it as a discrimination. I mean, I think their attitude, at least as I interpret it, was kind of like, we hear where you're coming from, but our hands are tied type thing. We also kind of got a little bit into the stats as to how many commercial events are in the district. And the numbers they gave to me seemed off from my knowledge, but the numbers that they showed us that they had pulled from the system basically made it seem like there's far fewer commercial events than we think, but that data is yet to be audited. They basically pulled some data and sort of made the argument that, well, it's actually not as bad as you think it is. So it's difficult to audit that data exactly, short of like going back and pulling every single event on our own and checking their work. But that was part of the art. So part one was kind of like, well, our hands are tied anyway. And then part two was like, well, actually, there aren't really as many events as you think there are, and they said that on the plaza specifically, which I was pretty skeptical.
Yeah, Suzanne.
Well, I just want to commend you for all this work. I think it's fantastic that you've been able to connect with SAFO. It sounds like a really positive discussion, and there will be questions about what they will and won't count. But I think that really helps inform the way you look at applications. And for example, frequency might be something that replaces commercialism. If they don't regard commercialism as important, they might regard frequency as something. Anyway.
Thank you. Yeah, it took a while to get there, but now I feel like we've really got this good connection with the new head who started, the head of operations. I mean, Dawn's been there for a while. She's the head of the CECM, which sits above SAPO. She's been there for a while, but we haven't really had a good chance to get to know her. So I think it's the start of what's hopefully a closer relationship. It was tough when the last guy, Stefan, left a few years ago, and they just had an interim for a while, and she didn't really want to be there. But now I think we've established a bit of a better relationship.
Yeah, Carter.
So on the plaza, I think the discrepancy in numbers comes because they're commercial entities sponsored by the bids. So it doesn't go in the commercial bucket, it goes in the bid bucket, even though it's a commercial event and the fees are distributed differently, I believe.
Yes.
And that was one thing. The other thing, which was really interesting as far as a framework of how you think about the city, they give the permit for the whole sidewalk and then they take back, which is the reverse of the way most people think about it. And the reason that's important is because that's where in certain areas, we may require more passageway, for example, on Broadway, as opposed to side streets. And that's how coming up with a uniform applicability of where we need more room for passageway, and also recurring problematic spots like the south side or 14th Street near Union Square, in front of the subway station at Broadway Lafayette. You know, those types of things that can be put on paper that expedites.
Yeah.
It's really very informative, but the philosophy of we take it back is very important.
Very interesting.
I think, because it's not something I think has ever been explained to the board.
And they only take back, they only require a very small pedestrian passageway on any block right now. And so Carter, had raised this about, DOT doing all these pedestrian corridors, and were they taking that to account? And they said kind of, well, no. But we can
came up with Broadway is 5 feet enough passageway on Broadway and Soho. We get. And I'm not sure that's a great idea. So, that was an example.
Yes, Amy.
I wanted to add that there was a tantalizing bit of information where I can't remember the language, but they talked about something we had a concern about, and they mentioned some language. I have it written down in my notes. I think it was more conversation. We'll find out some of those intricacies in government kind of regulations where if you know the code language to use, you can get things done. And you know what I mean? Like using, excellent instead of good, that's not what I mean, but and so that found that really interesting. And I know we talked. So we'll see where that goes.
And I think just like a fun fact, I believe we're either number 2 or 3 amongst all community boards in the city in terms of number of events. I thought we might be number 1, but we're not.
We can't be number 1 in every category.
So there's a couple in Brooklyn. There's a couple in Brooklyn that they said have just a massive number of block parties.
Okay.
That push them above us.
Okay. Okay. I do have, we still have traffic to get to. Do you have something?
I can, sure. Yeah, I do remember about the elevator replacement.
Okay, let's hear from traffic.
So we had 2 items. I think the more important one is to alert people that New York City Transit is doing elevator replacements on 14th Street stations, being Union Square and 8th Avenue, and also at West 4th Street. And it's going to be a lot of hardship because even though they're always going to have one direction in operation or up and down, that means that people will be deprived who want to use the other direction. And we asked for certain kinds of mitigation. I mean, the mitigation, I won't go into it, it's in the resolution. It's so insufficient that it's just laughable. But we did ask them at least to improve the bus service, at least for the time being, speed it up, have more frequency, public bus service, provide shuttles. They often do shuttles. We asked for advance information. They really haven't put out much advance information except to us. So it's kind of, and it will go on until 25. End of 2025. So anyhow, spread the word to whoever, because a lot of people do depend on those elevators. So that was one. The other was that we had a great presentation from a gentleman from Sam Schwartz, who's kind of on his own, going around giving presentations to educate people about what is called daylighting. For those who do not know what daylighting is, it's simply clearance from the end of the crosswalk to the corner in the street to give visibility when cars are turning. So visibility to the drivers as well as visibility to the pedestrian and the bicyclist, by the way. And it was very helpful. We've certainly asked for daylighting many times over the years. The reason this is kind of taken up speed now, because Mayor Adams has said that he would like to institute 1,000 corners for daylighting in a year. And that's just like a fraction of the thousands and thousands of corners that we have at intersections, I should say, in the city. And the state, by the way, requires it across the board. So the city opted out because they could, but that kind of has put a lot of people in danger and also caused an awful lot of fatalities and injuries. So again, we did a resolution. I believe that at least 5 or 6 more community boards so far in Manhattan and some in Queens, as well as Brooklyn, are also doing resolutions in favor of universal daylight.
We do have a new business item. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I just want to say, I think we were lobbied to put this on our agenda for, it's not Sam Schwartz, it's by another group, and we should be disclosing that on our agendas because it's unclear where that funding is, who he's paid by, who it's coming from. And these are important disclosures to make, just generally speaking.
We've been doing this for really years and years, where we've had experts come in. And from, yes, if you want to call it lobbying, I think advocacy groups, I mean, if you feel you should have it on the agenda, that is a group, I wasn't even quite sure where it came from.
But that's my point.
But the name was on there. So the name
No, but that was the presenter, not necessarily the requester. There was the questions during the meeting.
Of his own volition. It's not like he's getting paid.
I understand, but he also appears before the board as a paid person for other entities. And it's just with
Sam Schwartz has appeared before the board endless times for bids, plans.
No, I understand. That's my point.
So is that also a lobbyist? We haven't gone all.
Somebody came to us trying to get us to take an action.
Who is that?
That's my point.
Oh, I thought you,
That is-
then how do you know?
Because it came up during the meeting and Sam Schwartz said it wasn't him.
Then we cover ourselves. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a disclosure. Okay.
Yeah. We do have a new, okay, guys, we do have a new business item though.
My new business is term limits. I don't feel that this board is preparing sufficiently for when many of us are going to be term limited off. And I think of all the expertise in this room and on our board that is going to go away, and I feel that it's important for us to plan for that. I know that Mark created a list about how long people have been on, but it's not so clear to me. I have a feeling that there's going to be one year where like 20 people leave the board. And who's going to replace them? Whatever, everyone who's built up the expertise in traffic and landmarks and, in land use and all that kind of stuff. So I just don't know how we can get our board to focus on that, but I worry about that. That was my.
Yes, Valerie.
I would say I'd like the official list from the borough president's office, so we know that that's like when everyone rolls off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can actually calculate that from.
But why don't we just ask for the
Okay.
official one? I mean, why, I'm just saying just
Yeah, I-
everyone
I have
have,
the
like,
list.
just get what's on the record.
Got it.
Isn't that list public?
Yes, Brian.
Sorry, what's,
It is, it's.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add that you may be aware that there's this group called the Future of Community Boards. I didn't name it. Which is district managers that talk among ourselves. And we, this past month, one of the topics was a group that may be facilitating community boards and their district managers to set up a transition committee and to do it not in 2027, but to plan for it now and to look ahead to it. So I'll have more to contribute as that process unfolds, but it is something that's in the works among the district managers.
I mean, we have to start thinking about people who've been leading committees for millions of years, starting to like leave their posts as chair so that someone else can develop that, to develop that expertise. I really
agree.
need
I'm
to
really-
plan for that.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
and I think,
Okay. Yeah, Valerie.
I was gonna say, like, by committee, to Susanna's point of, what do those transition years, or what do those term roll-offs look like per committee?
Yeah.
So that we can look at.
I actually can give you that. I put
But like-
together an
But
information.
like, also just like, what's the official date from the borough president's office? That's what the only one that really matters.
Okay, that was.
Okay, we got a couple of,
Sorry.
yes.
That's the question is, how do you identify the candidates for replacing those people too?
That's
a
right.
Really.
And frankly, part of the difficulty is getting people who are willing to step up. That's
And-
that's where the biggest problem
But
is.
I think that is under, that's a job for committee chairs. You've got to go out and recruit people who our perfect example is schools. We knew, our kids, Patricia's kids aged out. My kids are going to be in high school next year. We deal mostly with elementary and middle. And found a parent that is a very involved and very capable and very knowledgeable parent with a whole bunch of really little kids. So she will be around for a while,
The other thing is that on our
Okay, look,
committee.
Carter did have his hand up.
Well, I understand.
I was just.
Oh, you were-
see me was back.
Sorry.
Do you want to go? I was just gonna say, is there a limitation on termed out community board members serving as public members?
No.
So maybe it's not perfect, but some of them could stay on as public members in their respective committees as sort of a guide.
It's absolutely, but again,
Guiding voice.
you are then depending on, you are depending on people to make that first step up. The question is, how do you nurture within your committees, identifying people who will then step up? And of course, you have to look at who's on your committee to go ahead and based on the terms of their years of availability, how are you going to start transferring that information?
I was gonna suggest, I think that there are gonna be committees where the committee chair should step down and become a vice chair. Elect someone in the committee who would like to be the chair and cede the role to them so that there are a number of years where you as the former chair are supporting the new chair and then you roll off someone else. And I just think that their committee chairs should in some cases step down.
Basically, we need an actual plan.
So the most important thing I think that we can start now,
And then
setting up our website differently, so it's committee focused and not board focused. And so that you can click on any committee and see what they did all year. And that's step number one, and it becomes auto archiving. In that you just have to set it up and keep adding to it. And then somebody can just scroll down and it's much easier for anybody to understand what a committee has done, what their roles are, and all the past resolutions are. We are not set up that way. It'd be helpful for the public, but more importantly, you can't go back and do it. It's too much work. So you have to start at some point going forward to do it.
I wonder if we should have a committee that.
Okay, this is a conversation that we can have, and I definitely agree with you on this. But we're not gonna make a decision here and now. I think this is again an offline conversation that people, we need to look at, for example, the list of who is on the board, what their term limits out, how many spaces we have. I think this year we're going to have at least 5 or 6 open spaces. And part of it is also, who do we recruit to join the board
Right.
in terms of skill sets? So that, because those people who are going to be joining now and next year especially are going to be the ones that we're going to be able to look to. But if we don't actively recruit based on this various skill sets and the various bodies of knowledge, that's how we're going to fall short. Yeah.
And I agree with Carter's point that archiving is a big part of this transition conversation. So that definitely needs to be in whatever entity forms of doing that, like the archival piece, how things are filed, I think is critical.
I just wanted to say, Carter, could you make a list of those kind of things that might be needed?
I can,
I mean, at least one have as reference.
it's the type of thing that, if we thought about this and had a framework for back, Susanna could go back and immediately look up St. Vincent.
Reapply.
Committee did there, just looking at her committee. But we do it by the whole board. So it's you have to go through the calendars to find everything. And so it's very difficult to find anything. But most people on each committee are interested in their committee. And that's
Just to remind everybody, application deadline for reapplying is 26th. I'm sure you've all. My bad, yes, but
A couple more days.
yeah, I'm sure you've all gotten emails if you haven't.
Good. Twice.
Public members again, huh?
Getting our resolutions in for the.
We really do need to get anybody who's got resolutions, they've got to be in by, tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
You can
Actually, minor.
Trying to keep it.
stop the recording. Is the recording stopped?
No.
Okay, yeah, I can't.
No,
Turn that off.